Shortly before she died, my grandma gave me the only photograph she had from her childhood. Whenever I look at this picture, I'm reminded of the hardships that she faced growing up on a small farm in the mountains of northern Utah. I'm also reminded of her resilience. You see, my grandma's mom died of scarlet fever when she was only 8 years old, so she had to grow up fast. Every summer, her dad would travel the mountains, selling his crop of strawberries from the wagons, and my grandma rode in the back, managing the berries and handling the sales. At home, she baked the bread, fed the livestock, and went to school. But no matter how busy she got, she always managed to find time for her favorite hobby, which was riding her horse bareback. I didn't grow up on a farm, but like my grandma, I spent my summers roaming the mountains above Utah's famous Fruitway. I guess you could say I took the American West for granted, never imagining a world without roadside produce stands, peach festivals, and local cheese factories. Today, I'm a rural sociologist, and I no longer take that world for granted. I've worked with small-scale producers in Latvia, Ghana, Namibia, and South Africa, and everywhere I've worked, I've found that rural communities are struggling to survive. For small-scale farmers in particular, the future's precarious. But I've also found that small-scale farming communities share a common spirit. The places on this map are culturally quite different. But in the rural landscapes where I've worked, I've encountered the same values that my grandparents passed down to me. A code of honor that emphasizes independence and mutual respect, as well as care for people and nature. These are the values that make small-scale farmers resilient. These also are the values of fair trade and local food, which are challenging business as usual. You see, industrial agriculture relies on a monocropping system to produce food in quantity and sell it cheaply. This satisfies conventional market demand, but there's a cost to all this cheap food. Large agribusinesses have become dependent upon intensive chemical inputs, government subsidies, and a casual labor force that's all too often comprised of displaced people. In contrast, fair trade and local food value people and nature. By shortening the distance between producers and consumers, these sustainable trade systems send a greater share of the profit back to the people who actually grow our food. And this helps farmers invest in more environmentally friendly technologies. So conscious consumers don't necessarily pay more for fair trade or local food, but every dollar that's spent represents a vote for social and environmental responsibility. In other words, what we buy matters. First, let me talk about the fair trade movement, which primarily speaks for marginalized producers in the global south, or countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. There are multiple fair trade systems that govern a range of commodities, but the movement leaders are Fairtrade International and the World Fair Trade Organization. Fairtrade International employs a product certification system that sends fairly traded foods such as coffee, chocolate, and tea into major supermarket outlets. The World Fair Trade Organization promotes sustainable development across the entire supply chain, including supporting brands and retailers that meet fair trade standards in their own business practices. So what are fair trade's values and standards more specifically? Well, fair trade is a trading partnership based on dialogue, transparency, and respect that seeks greater equity in international trade. Membership is voluntary, but in order to access fair trade markets, producers and buyers must meet fair trade standards. These typically include minimum pricing guarantees that support producers when conventional market pricing falls below the cost of production. They also include labor and environmental standards that ensure safe working conditions and that protect delicate ecosystems. Within Fairtrade International's product certification system, Producer organizations also receive social premiums, or a percentage above the negotiated product pricing that goes into a communal fund to support sustainable development projects. Farmers have used these funds to invest in more environmentally friendly practices, and today, many fair trade producer organizations also maintain dual organic certification. The fair trade movement has achieved remarkable sales growth in the past 3 decades due to savvy marketing campaigns like the Fairtrade University initiative. In 2018, Arizona State University joined 47 other universities in a pledge to provide students with access to fair trade food and clothing. In fact, we're the largest fair trade university in the United States. One could even argue that the fair trade movement is leading a sustainable market revolution backed by an army of conscious consumers. Within Fairtrade International system alone, fair trade goods are now being produced in 73 countries and sold in 125 countries around the world. And in 2016, global sales surpassed $9 billion. What we buy matters. In Wuppertal, South Africa, small-scale rooibos tea farmers have drawn from ancestral tradition to blaze new trails. Wuppertal is located in the Cederberg Mountains, at the geographic origin for rooibos tea. Like champagne in France, this earthy herbal tea is a national cultural product. And like South Africa, it has a complicated history. During the colonial era, the indigenous and mixed-race peoples of the Cederberg harvested wild rooibos and processed it according to an age-old procedure that involves fermenting small batches of tea and then drying it in the sun until it acquires its characteristic red color. At the start of the 20th century, Wuppertal farmers collaborated with white farmers in the region to establish an agricultural industry. However, in 1948, South Africa began enforcing racial segregation under a legal system of apartheid. And during the apartheid era, Wuppertal's farmers were banned from participating in commercial markets. This impoverished Wuppertal as a whole. But when apartheid ended in 1994, Wuppertalers rapidly mobilized to re-enter their industry that their grandparents had established. In fact, they were among the first small-scale farmers in South Africa to participate in international markets. Not only did they secure organic certification in 1998, but they were actively pursuing fair trade buyers well before Fairtrade International had even established standards in rooibos. These changes have allowed a new generation to pursue their dreams. In 2004, Jessica was only 23 years old, but she already knew she wanted to follow in her parents' footsteps as a rooibos tea farmer. She farms 2.5 tons of fair trade and organic certified tea per year, which her cooperative sells to international buyers like Equal Exchange. Fair trade has enabled Jessica to live independently and save for the future, while staying in the mountain community that she loves. So, fair trade tea isn't necessarily more expensive than the conventional tea sitting on that supermarket shelf, but its value is so much greater. For small-scale farmers like Jessica, what we buy matters. Now, I'd like to return home by covering another major branch of the sustainable trade movement, local food. Like fair trade, local food asks consumers to speak for producers through the goods we buy. Perhaps the most traditional of local food systems are the roadside produce stands of my youth, where my family bought freshly picked peaches by the bushel for a fraction of the supermarket cost. However, in recent years, local food systems have become increasingly sophisticated and now include things like neighborhood farmers markets and community-supported agriculture programs. Community-supported agriculture, or CSAs, ask consumers to pledge their support to a particular farm by buying a share of the farm's production. In return, consumers receive a weekly box of produce. They also receive regular farm updates, recipes, and are invited to fun farm events. Growers benefit from this system by securing advanced working capital and greater financial security. In Phoenix, the local food movement took off in 1999 when Crooked Sky Farms coordinated the largest CSA program in Arizona. Frank Martin, the farm's owner, is the son of a Native American farm worker. Frank grew up in Buckeye in the 1960s, and he worked the valley's cotton fields alongside his dad, who unfortunately died of pesticide exposure at a young age. As a result of this experience, Frank dreamed of restoring farming to the traditional ways that he had learned from his mother. And in 1994, he left his career in trucking to start a farm. Crooked Sky's operations are grounded in the Native American philosophy of agricultural stewardship, which emphasizes care for land, plants, animals, and people. The farm also employs organic technologies and uses heirloom seeds to cultivate a broad range of specialty produce, including the Itoi onion, traditionally cultivated by Tohono Uaram people, and now prized by local chefs. So if you want to become a conscious consumer, there are two things you can do. First, look for the Fairtrade label when buying internationally produced goods such as coffee, chocolate, and tea, and start supporting Fairtrade brands and retailers. Second, get out of the supermarket and into your community when looking for fresh food produced closer to home. Find a locally owned farm stand at your neighborhood farmer's market, or become a member of a community farm. Remember, when you support fair trade and local food, you are voting for business partnerships that value people and nature. My grandma, who's pictured as I remember her at the bottom center of this slide, always told me that the secret to resilience is mutual respect, and that food brings people together. Whether they're cultivating tea on the other side of the world or growing melons right around the corner, small-scale farmers are working hard to feed us a more sustainable future. What we buy and how we support them matters. Thank you.